Hi, I'm Marlowe at New Elements Gallery, and I'd like to go over some pieces of my show, which is called Neo+stalgia, and we'll explain the meaning of that word in just a minute. But you'll see that there's two different styles of artwork shown here, but in reality they're not different styles. The content is different, but the media and the stylization is similar. So if we start with the first one here, this is the nostalgia part of Neo+stalgia, and what these are basically representations of old-time magazine covers from the 1920s and 30s. Some of them are pulp magazines. They usually feature a very brightly colored image, and what I've done is I've done an homage to those days of illustration and artwork, and taken an image that is existing from 70 or 80 years ago, and then turning it into another piece of art. So I create the art all around this image, which is backgrounds, and they're very graphic, they're very colorful, stylish, and what happens is that they're also dimensional, so that the ambient light which hits this artwork creates a natural cast shadow. I like to call it grabbing the viewer by the lapels, because the light and the shadow creates a three-dimensional effect, which makes it pop off the canvas. If we go to the next one, this was a magazine called Snappy Tales, which I discovered existed in the 1920s and 30s. And again, I create a situation where the color and the people in it are so over the top and exaggerated. There's situations and scenes that aren't done today, overly very romanticized. And the interesting thing about the nostalgic part and these old-time, I call them pulp magazines, is that I discovered many years ago that my father had actually written for these magazines. And that was sort of my inspiration for doing these, sort of honor his memory as well. And if we go on to another one of the things I like is the empowered women and very tough ladies of the 1930s. Gun malls, for instance, the women behind the gangsters, they're always fun. Gun Malls magazine was an actual magazine that existed for a few years. And you know, these women, they look almost like Bonnie Parker from Bonnie and Clyde. And there's also a lot of action. They're tough. There's also some sex in these pictures too. A lot of these images have women with garter belts showing. And showing some leg. That was very typical of the era, and that's something again that I wanted to capture and you know, sort of bring out. So color is another thing, as well as dimension, and I think you'll see as we go through all of these pieces that the colorization is extremely vibrant and I would say almost oversaturated. Again, this is to make a piece of art on the wall jump out from the wall. Then, if we move along to the Neo part of the show, Neo meaning new, again, the content is different, but the medium is the same. Okay, they're on canvas, but again, they're all dimensional, and they're all extremely bold and colorful. This one is Seahorse, and this is an extreme vertical version, and what it is the seahorse is formed by actually the negative space. There actually is no seahorse there. It's simply cut out of the main image, which is made from collage images. One of the things I do is, I grew up in Florida, and I have an archive of undersea photographs that I've kept. I use those when I do my marine art, for instance, on the seahorse. So these are my images. They're all collaged. These are printed out on a fine watercolor paper, mounted, cut, pasted, and glued onto a canvas that is painted. If we move to the next one again, this is typical of the pulp magazines from the 1930s and 40s. This one is adventure stories, again showing a woman in a very difficult situation. Typically that would be reserved for a man back then, but these magazines were somewhat forward-thinking in that women were shown being empowered and doing daredevil things. Again, a lot of dimensionality, a lot of action. Most of these pictures have an active quality to them. They're not static. Again, that was part of the pulp magazine era. And if we move to Saucy Stories, this would have been a cover, for instance, of Cosmopolitan magazine back then, which had some rather racy stories and situations and visuals. This one I really like especially because it depicts a time and place that doesn't exist today. The two people in the canoe, the man has a collared shirt on, she's got a scantily clad outfit on, again with stockings showing, moonlit night. It's a situation and pose that is just not done today. So this one is very, very typical of the 30s and the 40s. Saucy Stories, and again, the moonlit night creates a very evocative, romantic image. And if we move over to the next one, this one is figure 3, called The Dove. And you'll notice that I've kind of highlighted the word figure 3. That's because when you're seen in books and magazines and things, when they have pictures of animals or flowers or plants, they usually assign a figure number to them. That's kind of boring, so I decided to make the figure and the number part of the artwork and make it larger. This one's the dove. Again, it's the same technique as the seahorse, where there's images, artwork, photographs that I've taken of plants and flowers, collaged them, printed them out on a fine watercolor paper, and then mounted it, and then cut the shape of the dove out. So again, the negative space is forming the bird. And you can see that here it shows the ambient light, which casts a really nice shadow. One of the things that I like about the artwork, and people would notice if they had it in their house, is that depending on where in the house the artwork is, in the daytime, the light coming from a window will cast a shadow in one direction. At night, when their lamps are on or chandeliers, the shadow might be in yet another direction. So it's almost an organic type of shadow. It moves around the canvas depending on where you are, what time of the day you are, in your house or your office. And the last one, again, evocative of a time that was long gone, the 1930s and the 40s, where it's two people over a campfire having a marshmallow. This magazine was actually called Thrilling Love Stories, okay? A title that would just evoke laughter today. This is actually from a little bit later era, the end of the pulp era was in the early 1950s. That's when they kind of just disappeared. One of the things that I like to point out on the nostalgic images is that a lot of the papers that they use for the background are handmade papers, and a lot of them I get from India, and they're quite evocative, they're quite handsomely done, they're very rich in color and texture, and they create a nice mood for the background. These pieces that you've seen here are all available at New Elements Gallery on display. There are more than shown here, but this is a typical example, and if you're ever around, I'd love to stop and have you come in.